Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, strong statements on the resurgent COVID-19 crisis from the governor and a top hospital leader. Both are pushing vaccinations for more Mississippians, but they diverge widely in tone. Also, the Southern Poverty Law Center skewers Mississippi for what it calls limitations on voting rights and details on a pursuit of public records from the Jackson Police Department. We're taking our complaint to state ethics officials. It was comments towards the top of last week that seemed to sum up our current crisis with COVID-19. It's a pandemic that, with the rise of new mutations and viral variants, is targeting more of our youngest people. But a simple photograph from Children's of Mississippi tells the sad story in vivid terms. This is Avery Mitchell. He is one of at least 8 children at last report in the ICU with COVID. 5 of them are under 12 years of age and too young to be vaccinated. Children's Parent Hospital, UMMC, reported Friday at least 30 children with confirmed or suspected cases of COVID-19. That's the highest number of pediatric COVID-19 patients there since the beginning of the pandemic. Well, the rise in patients young and old has brought our state's hospital network to the breaking point. UMMC's Vice Chancellor Lou Ann Woodward spoke Monday at the opening of one of the hospitals. She discussed in grave terms how Mississippi simply has failed to curb the spread of COVID-19.
We as a state, as a collective, have failed to respond in a unified way to a common threat. We have failed to use the tools that we have to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our children, and to protect our state. We have an effective and available, a safe and a free vaccine that we are not using to its fullest capacity. This time last year in press conferences, we all talked about, boy, if we can just get to that place where we've got a vaccine, we'll get on the other side of this. And what I have to say to the citizens of Mississippi is we have that vaccine, we have that tool, and we have not appropriately and fully used it. And this is where we are. We do not have to be here, but this is where we are. Our healthcare workforce all across the state is traumatized. We are in trouble. I implore you, if you have not yet gotten vaccinated, please do so right away. It is the right thing to do for yourself, for your family, for our children all across the state of Mississippi, and for the future of our state. We do not need any mandates to do the right thing. This is a decision each individual can make. I have spent a lot of time over these last years defending Mississippi to colleagues across the country. And I have done that with great pride. I love this place. This is my home. I'm proud of Mississippi. But our actions this last year are not easy to defend. I am grateful that there are resources out there, people that are out there that are willing at this point to come help us. I'm grateful for the DMAT team that's over in Garage B. I'm very grateful to the Samaritan's Purse team that will start seeing patients here tomorrow. I'm grateful that these people are willing to come in and help us as a state. But I want to say again, and I want to be as clear as I can be, we are not out of this. In order for October and November to look different than August looks, and the way that September will look, we have to do something. And what that is we have to get vaccinated. Wear masks, get vaccinated. Let's be responsible for ourselves and to each other. Thank you.
At last report, Mississippi lagged all other states in the U.S. except for one, Alabama, for full vaccinations per capita. And we have the worst rate of COVID-19 in recent days in the nation. So it's no surprise that Governor Tate Reeves is promoting vaccinations. But in a news conference Thursday, the governor was careful to frame the subject as a matter of personal choice. He also took many of the reporters at the presser to task. Just take a listen.
Now, getting the vaccine is your choice. It is your decision. And as your governor, I will always defend your right to make that decision, and I will respect your decision. As I mentioned the numbers earlier, however, more and more Mississippians are concluding that getting vaccinated is a good choice. A good choice not only for themselves, but for the people around them. If you are not vaccinated yet, I hope you will talk to your doctor. I hope you will study the statistics. And I hope you will make your decision based upon the facts. If you choose to not be vaccinated, there are other choices that you should consider to protect yourself and to protect the people you love. As we saw over the last year and a half, social distancing and masking and avoiding unnecessary indoor crowds have all proven to help. And they're all things you can decide to do on your own. I would like to take just a moment and talk about that idea of responsibility. I believe you, as an individual Mississippian, can be trusted to make good and responsible decisions. Good practices are a choice. Staying healthy is a choice. Keeping your neighbors and your coworkers healthy is a choice. Now let's all make the right choices. In a moment, we're going to take questions, and when that happens, I'm sure I'm probably going to get asked over and over why I'm not imposing a statewide mask mandate. Last Friday, I answered that question 7 times, but these same reporters will likely ask it again. I'd like to have a little bit of straight talk on this topic. There are those on the right who would like me to make masks and vaccines into a political battle. There are those on the left, including most of the reporters in this room, who really want to make political hay and grow their Twitter platform because I will not issue mandate after mandate after mandate. Let me be clear. I do not give a damn about any political agenda. This pandemic, much of which is a pandemic of the unvaccinated at this time, is before us. There will be plenty of time for politics, but this ain't it. My objective is to give Mississippians the facts, give them and their local officials the tools they need to make good decisions, and then trust them to love each other enough to do it. If you have questions on the facts, I'll be glad to try and answer them to the best of my ability. If you intend to use this press conference as a platform to grandstand or to get MSNBC clicking on your story, please do not expect me to help you do that.
With that, the governor did take questions from journalists, including 12 News' Anna Farish. Here's her reporting from Thursday evening.
Governor Tate Reeves says he's going to do everything in his power to keep the schools' doors open. Now, he said closing schools last year was a mistake. That was during the pandemic, and he believes that it's vital to have kids in the classrooms. He says there will be outbreaks, but that's just a consequence of an airborne virus. I asked Governor Reeves why he's so insistent on keeping students in the classroom and if he's disregarding their safety. This was his response.
And so why am I passionate about keeping kids in the classroom? Because I'm passionate to see kids learn. It breaks my heart every time there's a negative outcome. I hate it when kids test positive for COVID. I hate the fact that we have several thousand kids that have tested positive within the last couple of weeks. But this notion of if these kids were in the classroom, or that every one of these kids that contracted COVID got it in the classroom, is just not accurate. A lot of these kids had COVID when they came into the classroom because they're out in the community. There are those who would argue that if they aren't in the classroom and they don't have anything taking up their time, if they're at home or if they're in their community, well, maybe they're out indoors playing basketball with 50 of them sitting there watching it.
Governor Reeves says in the death of 13-year-old Michaela Robinson, it was an unfortunate tragedy, and he prays for her family.
That's Anna Fairst reporting. Trust 12 News to keep you up to speed on all the key developments in the COVID-19 crisis and the state's response to it. We'll take a look at voting rights in the Magnolia State when Mississippi Insight continues. The Southern Poverty Law Center has published its report to Congress on Mississippi's record in voting rights. The nonprofit says our state continues to limit voter participation to this day, and we're not alone in doing so. Karen Short joins us now by Zoom. She's the senior supervising attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center and SPLC Action Fund. Ms. Short, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first off, what is the purpose of this report?
The purpose of this report and the other two reports that we drafted for Alabama and Louisiana is to submit to Congress to build the congressional record in support of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which was just introduced this week by Representative Terry Sewell on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. It is a strengthening of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was weakened by the Supreme Court in 2013 in the Shelby County decision. We have been without Section 5 protection, which is essentially states and jurisdictions that have long histories, current histories, and present records of racial discrimination in voting, required to submit voting changes for federal pre-clearance coverage. And so they got rid of that protection, and we've been without it for 8 years. And so now we're presenting to Congress and saying it's still bad here in Mississippi and elsewhere in the Deep South. Voters are still being discriminated against. They're still having struggles getting to the polls. And it's time to put that federal protection back in place.
What are your group's findings on current voter suppression and intimidation practices right here in Mississippi?
We're finding a lot, and we documented it in our report. And our report is unique in that it has personal stories from voters across Mississippi who are explaining their struggles with closed polling places. For example, after the Shelby County decision, Mississippi did not have to tell the federal government when it wanted to move or close a polling place. And now people will show up to vote, and all of a sudden they're at the wrong polling place, and they might not have time. They're on their lunch break. They might not have time to go to this new polling place that's miles away. And so people are being disenfranchised by these changes that would have been covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Another example is that Mississippi is just really far behind when it comes to pro-voter laws. We have no online voter registration. We have no early voting. There's no same-day registration or automatic voter registration like there is in Georgia, for example. And there are also incredible impediments to absentee voting. You have to jump through numerous hoops to even qualify and then to complete your absentee ballot and have it counted in Mississippi.
There's been a lot of talk among our Republican state leaders about election security issues, and those are often provide a rationale against such things as expanded voting by mail. Do you agree with those concerns?
I don't. You know, every study that has looked at so-called voter fraud and tried to document instances of voter fraud has come up short. There simply is not the kind of evidence of voter fraud present that would justify these laws that are in documented ways suppressing the votes of people. We don't see voter fraud. We do see people being disenfranchised by the laws that are implemented in the name of voter fraud. And that's what we should all be concerned about. In the last election, every state that we wrote a report about, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, praised the elections. We had the most secure election ever. And yet they tried to introduce laws in the name of securing the elections further. There's no need for it. It's a solution in search of a problem.
Karen Short from the Southern Poverty Law Center, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and we'll be right back.
Just been so crazy in Jackson. This is not a typical response from a police agency, especially this size.
That's Brittany Suzanne with SpotCrime.com. She filed an ethics complaint against the city of Jackson about 3 years ago, alleging failures to properly respond to her records request. She's not the only one filing complaints about city records requests. Not only has 12 News filed our own report with the State Ethics Commission, that very board just leveled a $170,000 penalty for violating state records law in another case. Those fines and legal costs came in response to a complaint filed by news outlet WLBT. A commission report released August 6 says that city employees blame limited resources and little training for handling public records requests. 12 News has filed its own ethics complaint against Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba as the city's custodian of public records. We requested public data regarding the city's 911 response times, and the city has yet to provide that documentation. The Ethics Board is demanding that the city appoint designated public records officials for each department. Mayor Lumumba says the city will appeal.
In fact, we fully expect that it will be favorable to the city once other facts and information is detailed. And so we just look forward to that taking place.
Mayor Lumumba says the city looks to improve transparency, but he gave no details on how he'll approach that. Our own public records request was for data for JPD's calls for service log. That data documents 911 emergency calls and any other request for service by Jackson police officers. The problem is, JPD told us it didn't have such records. When you or your family have an emergency that requires police attention, how long will it take for an officer to respond? That's a question many Jacksonians have to ask themselves every day. The city's Public Service Communications Center handles tens of thousands of 911 emergency calls and non-emergency calls each year. That includes calls for service by the police and fire departments. In most jurisdictions, when a 911 call comes in for police assistance, the call center notes the time the call was received, when an officer is dispatched to respond to the call, and when that officer arrives at the scene. Here's an example from New Orleans, where such data is compiled and updated each weekday and available for public review. The data includes the location where police are called to respond and the type of crime in question: assault, robbery, vandalism, etc. Police commanders and city leaders can analyze this data and discover trend lines for the officer's response times. Any citizen has the right under state law to obtain and review this information. It includes no private information and nothing regarding criminal investigations in progress. On February 9th, we sent the City of Jackson a public records request for a copy of the police department's call for service logs from 2019 and 2020. We detailed exactly what data we're looking for, including case numbers, call and response times, addresses. State law requires public agencies to respond to such requests within 7 working days, either producing the records or denying their request. We got the city's response to our request 2 days later. Quote, "The city has reviewed its files and has determined there are no responsive documents to your request." End quote. That didn't make a lot of sense to us. So we revisited the matter 3 months later. This time we simplified our language, asking for call and response times, block addresses, and case numbers. Once again, the city told us, no responsive documents found. Our investigators spoke directly with Deputy Chief Tyrone Buckley, who oversees JPD's administrative division. He put us in touch with Chastity Brinson, who manages the records department. On June 11th, Brinson told us by phone that their computer-assisted dispatch system does not normally include officer arrival times on scene, so they denied our entire request. She also noted that JPD had recently switched to a new software system for logging and responding to 911 calls. She told us the 2019 and 2020 logs were likely archived in their old system, and she would have to consult their information systems experts to figure out how to provide the records to us. We waited almost 4 weeks and received no further response. When we inquired with the deputy chief, we received this response from Ms. Brinson, quote, I stated we could not produce the requested documents in the format of which you requested, and also that it could only be printed through my department. My recommendation was to speak with the IS department to see if another format was possible, end quote. It took the city 5 months to come up with that response, well past the 7 working day limit provided for in state law. The Ethics Commission has confirmed receipt of our request, but we don't know when they'll have a ruling on the matter. Meanwhile, you, our viewers in Jackson, have no data to evaluate how effective police officers are in responding to your emergency calls. I'll have a final word after the break. Big thanks to Karen Short and 12 News and Affairs for their contributions this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.